This conference will now be recorded.
Her voice makes me laugh every time. So while we're waiting, if everyone wants to, if you share your camera and I can see some faces. I know it's a weird request, but it helps whenever you're talking to actual people as opposed to some initials. But if you don't want to, I totally get it. Yeah. Jake, any experience with motion graphics?
Yeah, so I actually took a class this past semester. Um, so it's I haven't used it this summer just because the class I'm taking now is just strictly design based.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the instructor that I had was fantastic. His stuff is really good. He does a bunch of freelance work.
Cool. What
So yeah,
school?
I got to do Madison College here in Madison, Wisconsin. So it used to be Madison Area Technical College. Most people still call it that, but yeah, the design program is fantastic. I mean, going back to school, I went to UW, Wisconsin, for a 4-year degree, and then I'm just kind of in the midst of switching my career, and going back to Madison College was like the best decision I could have made. I mean, the program is fantastic. So yeah,
Cool.
semester of motion graphics, and then I'm sure with my portfolio class coming up this fall, I'll be doing some more work.
Nice. So you said you're trying to switch careers, going
Yeah, so I
from
was
what?
working digital marketing strategy.
Okay.
So I've got a bachelor's degree in journalism, which like was focused on marketing.
Hmm.
Um, and it just was like the strategy was it was the same. We were doing the same thing every month, and it just was it wasn't challenging enough, and I thought it would be more creative than it was, and it probably would have been at maybe a different agency, but I just like fell in love with what the creative team was doing, and I'd been like twiddling around in Adobe by myself for a few years at that point. So I said, why not try jumping in and making the switch to doing it full time. So it's like I said, it's the best decision I've made so far. So
Hey,
really excited.
that's awesome. That's fun stuff. All right. So last time I'll ask, but if you can share your screen or share your camera, and I can talk to some people, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, Tina, welcome. All right. So I have a few things planned for today, but and the reason why I like to see everyone's faces and to have more of a conversation and to kind of take you guys where it's useful for you. Because I want to start from the beginning, right? But I'm gonna try not to get too technical with a lot of things, because also what I'll do is I have probably 7 hours worth of video lessons on like all of the different parts of After Effects, and I can give you guys a link for that. So if you want to really dive deep into things, that would be a good way to do that. So what I think would be most useful for everyone is I'll kind of overview a few things, a few of the kind of simple things to kind of get you going, and then we'll have a little bit of an assignment at the end of this uh, this part of the workshop. And yeah, it's I'm trying to understand a little bit more about what you guys want to know. So if I start going down a path and you're like, all right, no, like this part's like not useful for me, or like if you have any specific questions along the way, just let me know. This is the only workshop that we're doing where I am in fact the host and the teacher of this workshop. So I'm going to do my best to pay attention to questions, but at any point, just feel free to unmute your mic and then just stop me, interrupt me. It's fine. I'll occasionally stop and ask if you have any questions. Cool. Any questions before I start? Wonderful. Okay. So motion graphics, right? I so my background, well, whenever I was 12 years old, I don't know, maybe been less than 12. Anyway, I saw Monsters Inc. and I was like, what? Like, I need to learn how to do that. Like, that's what I want to do. I remember watching like the bonus features of it, and I was like, it just amazed with all the technical stuff that went behind it. And they were like, obviously, like this is beyond motion graphics, right? But like, I saw some of like the 3D animation tests that they were doing with like the hair on Sully, and like they actually ran him through an obstacle course to make sure that the hair would stay on, and they showed the test that failed too. And I actually probably was most inspired by those that failed because I don't know, I guess it put things into perspective, and that it's not so easy to just make things that are perfect. So like they had him run into this obstacle course, and the hair just blew off of him, and just went everywhere, just completely made a mess of everything. So it took him a long time to figure that stuff out. And for me, that's the kind of person I am too, where I'm like, I want to figure things out. I want to, I don't know, spend time trying to solve those kinds of problems. So ended up going to school for 3D animation at Art Institute of Pittsburgh. And while I was there, I started realizing that, it's, for me, it was a little bit less about learning all the technical stuff and more about trying to tell really cool stories with animation or motion graphics. So yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit more about that. So after I graduated, I ended up working with U.S. Department of Energy, doing more motion graphics, kind of work for some of the scientists. And it was, again, I actually really liked that job because it was taking these really complex ideas that people had and making it so people could understand it. Because scientists are not the best at speaking about their ideas or their new innovations and inventions to other people, especially, their goal was trying to get funding. So I was part of their kind of in-house team that would try to talk with these scientists and try to understand them a little bit more and be able to kind of translate that message into motion graphics. From there, I worked in Los Angeles for a bit doing music videos, commercials, some movies, and was doing a lot of visual effects, but I wasn't doing as much motion graphics anymore whenever I was there. And decided when I was there that I was going to start my own company, and we were going to focus on motion graphics, and that's the short story of my past here. For the last 5 years or so, I've actually been teaching motion graphics. Well, up until last year, and I switched to teaching content marketing instead. But so I've been teaching this for a long, long time. I can tell you right now that we're not going to be able to go over everything in 2 classes, but like I said, I want to be able to at least give you guys a solid overview and then let you ask the questions that you have. If you want to see how something is done, if you have this favorite piece of motion graphics that you've seen in the past and you want to understand a little bit more about how they've done it, I want to make some time available for that as well. So I am going to jump in, and again, if you miss something and it's something quick and you just want to be like, oh, hey, wait, what'd you press? Just let me know. Also, we are recording this, so it will be available probably in the next couple of days, maybe later today. All right, so let's share my screen. All right, so this is After Effects. This is what we are going to be using. There are a lot of different tools when it comes to motion graphics, but After Effects is probably the easiest to kind of get started with, mostly because it comes with the Creative Suite and it's just kind of easy, especially if you already have Photoshop or Illustrator, then you'd probably be pretty familiar with a lot of the stuff that's in here. So show of hands, who has opened up this application before? Damn it, Tina. No, it's cool. Tina, you're familiar with Photoshop, Illustrator, right? Photoshop. Okay, so I can frame a lot of the stuff that we talk about with that. So it can be a little overwhelming. There are a ton of buttons in here, but again, I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to try to show you the quickest way to get into this and be able to just make something cool, right? Even like the littlest things. You know, part of what I do for people now is you know, bringing life to the things that, I mean, a lot of times we're doing the designs, but sometimes people give us designs, depending on the companies that we're working with, and they're like, we just need life into this. And stuff like that makes a huge difference when it comes to social media and engagement in general. People respond much more to movement, even if it's just such a subtle movement. So just the littlest of life into a design can just open up a whole new world of possibilities when it comes to how you engage with your audience. So yeah, so this is After Effects. I have these folders in here. I have it default to open those. I'm just going to delete that because this is what it'll look like for you. The first thing that we're going to do is, again, I'm not going to go through all of these little menus because there are just a ton of different things. But the first thing that you have to do every time you open this program is you have to make a new composition. Basically, this is like making a new document or making a new artboard kind of thing. So you could either press this little button right here, or you can go up into composition and go to new composition. Now, when it comes to video, the difference between video and print is, you know, quite a big difference, right? Whenever we are dealing with video as opposed to print, we're dealing with a different color space. Print is CMYK colors. It's I guess I don't want to get too technical into that, but and then when we're in video, we're working with screens, so it's just RGB. So going in here first, there are presets on like different kind of document sizes that you can do. You don't have to mess around with that. You could just type in the dimensions that you want. Now, typically what we end up doing on pretty much everything is 1920 by 1080. So 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels tall. That is your standard for high definition televisions at this point. There are a lot of other things that you could do. So when it comes to Instagram, I mean, Instagram is using, you know, you can use a square in that, so you can actually make a square. A lot of times what we do is we'll make things at 1920 by 1080, and then we'll make little cut downs of things afterwards for the different sizes that we might need. So you could just type in, you know, maybe you want 1080 by 1080, or you could even do, I think it's 1350 tall and 1080 wide is what Instagram can do. But anyway, you can type in whatever dimensions that you want right here. But we'll do 1920 by 1080. Without getting too much into it, again, aspect ratio, you want that to be square pixels, because you choose some of these things right here and it leads to stretching and all this kind of stuff. I'm gonna leave that. Frame rate, that's a really important one here. It's essentially, I mean, what video is it's a series of images played back at a certain speed to create the illusion that it is actually moving, right? That's all that's happening. Now, there's a lot of different standards for this, and you can do, if you're posting something to Instagram or any social media, you can literally do it whatever frame rate that you want. When you're making something for television, a lot of times that honestly depends on the country that you live in, and it's really weird that that's the case, and I can do a whole course on this, but kind of some of the standards would be 30 frames a second for television. For film, it's 24. In Europe for television, the standard is 25. It gets weird, but then you have some movies that are now coming out that are 60 frames a second. Not a lot of movies are doing that because it takes a huge toll on just data in general. So basically all their file sizes are now double the size if they're doing 60 frames a second, and our computers are still not quite there, even some of the highest powered ones, to be able to handle some of like this really big stuff. So in this case right here, what we're going to do is 24 frames per second, because this has more of a cinematic feel, and this is again where we just generally start with all of our projects. But depending on what we're making stuff for, if we're doing something for broadcast or television, like they'll tell us like, okay, well, we need it to be at 60 frames a second, we need it to be at 30 frames a second. They'll tell us. So they always give you like a listing of how things kind of need to be. So in this case, like I said, we'll leave it at 24 frames per second. So what that means is it's going to cycle through 24 images per 1 second. Now, when we go down here, we have a start time code and a duration. Start time code is always 0. Duration is how long you want your video to be. For this case right here, we'll just say 5 seconds. We have hours right up front. We have minutes, seconds, and then frames. So, I mean, it's basically like if you were to put 12 here, that's the same as, since we're doing 24 frames per second. Sorry if I lose you here. Since we're working at 24 frames per second, if I type in 12 frames, that's half a second, right? So something to keep in mind there. But for this case right here, we'll just say 5. Background color, I always leave that at black, and you can just make a new color as you want. Basically, anytime that you leave black or you change the color right here, a lot of people think that, oh, my design is going to have that certain color in the background, but it's actually like completely invisible. So this is like simply just how you're viewing it. But whenever the file is actually done and you render it out, it won't show up as that color. So just a little thing about that. So once you are ready, and you can also go to the top here and name it, we'll call it Making Midwest Test. Yes. All right. So then you press OK when you are done. And then you get something like this that should probably look familiar here from Photoshop, where you have this transparent background. You can use the middle mouse wheel if you have a wheel mouse to go back and forth. You can also do, oh, what is it? Damn it, there's something over here. Oh, you can also, in where it says 50% right here, it's a magnification ratio. You can tell it that you want to look at it at 1.5%. You can say I want it at 50%, or you can say you want it to fit to screen right there. So that's normally what I end up doing right there.
Scott, is there a shortcut for fitting to screen, like in Photoshop and Illustrator? I think it's Command 0 or Control 0.
I don't think that there, I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is.
Okay. Yeah, because that was one of the frustrating things, because like scrolling in and out, I feel like like the values that it gives you are like so different.
Yeah, it's definitely not a great idea to just always rely on kind of scroll in and out. That's a really good question. I honestly don't know. I've never even thought about it. I usually just kind of just quickly come over here and just hit fit, but I'm sure there's something if you Google that, I'm sure something will come up. All right, I'm gonna write some of the questions down, and we'll kind of get to them a little bit later, so I don't want to take too much time just yet. Okay, so then we have, this is kind of like your artboard or your document right here. A few things that we have around here. So also I have some plugins like this one down here that you won't see in yours. Try to ignore those things, but real quick, just kind of going around the interface. Starting at the top here, we have a lot of different tools right here, where this is your selection tool is, you can select different layers that are inside of your document here. We have the hand tool here, which will move your document around. When you get back, you can go to fit. You have the zoom tool right here. We have rotation. There's a camera tool. We won't get to that, but if you ever start getting to like using 3D layers and stuff inside of After Effects, you can essentially make a camera and then like move the camera around in sort of like a 3D space. We have a shape tool over here. If you click and hold on it, you have some options for different shapes, and I'm going to get to, that's going to be the first thing that we start doing here after I talk about the interface. We also have a pen tool, which should be familiar. Text. We have, brush tool, a clone stamp, eraser. I generally don't use these kinds of things. Kind of a really good workflow with After Effects is to use it with Photoshop or Illustrator. Sometimes I'm using all of them, depending on kind of what I need. If I'm doing something that's vector, well, I can make something in Illustrator, I can bring it into After Effects, I can animate it, and then I can scale it up and it keeps its resolution, right? If you do that with Photoshop, like you make something and then you bring it into After Effects and you scale it up, it's gonna blur, right? So yeah, that's that. And then a few other things I'm not gonna talk too much about here, but when you are on a shape tool, you can also select your fill up top here and your stroke and the width of that stroke. And coming around to the left side here, this is our project panel right here. This is basically anything that we bring into our file, we can bring it in right over here. Basically, we can bring in images or video through this. We could just double click on the empty space here and we can find whatever we need. Or we can, when we make a new composition, that shows up in here too. If you ever, well, I guess I'll come right down here to the bottom now with the timeline. There's little tabs right here, and each one of these tabs are going to be a composition. You have a render queue, which I think we'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about rendering. But we can make as many compositions as we want, and it'll make new tabs in here. To make another composition, I can go to composition new, and I call that one comp 2. And then we have making Midwest test, and then we have comp 2 over here, and we can make as many compositions as we want. And think of these more like folders or groups. So we can go to this making Midwest test, and we can actually drop in a composition into another composition. Some real Inception shit that we can make happen. But and you can also delete anything that's in here. Actually, I can double click and I can bring in an image, and basically all you have to do is, you can drop things into your timeline. And when you do that, actually, let me just bring in a couple images here. So every time you bring in an image, it just comes in as its file name. Another thing you can do is you can hold shift and click on multiple, or you can do control click, select multiple, and then you can drop them into a folder to organize them more. So images, I'll just put all those images that I just grabbed and put it in there. I can do a drop down and I can see all these different images that are in here. There is also this button right here, create new composition. There's like 15 different ways to create a new composition. But again, think of that composition the same as you would an artboard or a new document. Yeah, and then make folders, and I'm not gonna get too much into this stuff. Delete will obviously delete things. So dropping down to our timeline here. So the idea here is that everything that we put in here, we can layer it, and very similar to how you can do in Photoshop. Anything that's on top is going to show up on top. So drop a couple images down here. And it brings them in at the size that they are. So they will come in at a different size. And you can see if it's outside of the document area, you will see that it will just show you the outer lines of what you have there. And let's see how I want to do this. So with that selection tool selected up top here, you can actually take some and you can move them around like so. Pretty cool. Yep. All right. And then, so in our timeline, since we told it that we wanted to do 5 seconds, if I hit spacebar, it will play our animation, which we have none right now, so it's not going to play anything. But you can see all the way to the left here, we have our frame rate and our time code that we're currently at. This little scrubber right here, we can click it and we can drag it anywhere we want to see where we are in our animation. At the bottom here, we can change how zoomed into that timeline we are. So all the way to the left means you're all the way zoomed out. You can see the entire 5 seconds. If we zoom all the way in, we can see down to a single frame at a time. Let's see here. So I don't know if I want to go there just yet. Well, I guess I will. So every time you have a layer, you have a drop down for certain things, for certain options on what you can do to it, and transform. And we're going to talk about that just in a little bit. But you have these options. Over to the left, you can hide and unhide certain layers in your animation. So before I get into any of the animation stuff, let me go over to the right side here. We have an info panel that'll tell us kind of some of the color information, which is sometimes useful, but in this case, probably not as much. You can select any of these dividers here to make more room or less room for certain things. We have a tab over here for effects and presets. I'm not going to get too much into that unless you guys have questions about them, but basically you can apply effects to layers that are in your timeline. Up top, we have a window button right here, and this kind of opens up all these different panels. So if you ever lose any of these panels, and then you're like, I'm pretty sure it was there before, you can go into window and you can either uncheck things that you don't want to be there, or you can check things that you do wish to be there. And the other tab next to effects here that I have is character. So we can add text and change that text and change the settings for that text. And again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But coming down, we have our paragraph. We have our align tab. I use this one quite a bit. Same aligns that are in Photoshop and Illustrator. And I think that's all I'll talk about with the interface, unless you guys have any more questions about that. Any questions about anything that's on the screen? Just menus, panels, and stuff? Okay. So what I want to do next is talk a little bit about shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these in the timeline. I'm just going to delete these because I don't want anything there. And what I can do is I can go up to our shape panel here, or toolbar up here. And if I click and hold, I have the option to make all these different kinds of shapes. I'm going to select a circle. And I'll go over here to fill. And just by selecting on the color there, I can make the color. And then over to stroke. If I don't want to stroke, I can put it to 0. If I don't want to fill, I can just click on the word fill, and I can use this little transparent guy right here. But I do, and I don't really want a stroke, so I'm going to leave it at that. And then I'm going to just click anywhere in the screen here on top of your document. I'll make it fit first. So click, hold, and then I'm going to click and hold, and whenever I release, it's going to make that shape. So before I do that, though, I can hold Shift, and it will make it a circle, a perfect circle. Let's say let's do this right here. All right, so immediately whenever I make that shape, it also adds a shape in our timeline. And this basically, is the same as pulling in an image or bringing in a piece of video or working on something in Photoshop and then bringing it into After Effects. So what I can do here now is I can do a drop down on the ellipse. I can do a drop down on the transform. Under ellipse, I can change some of the options with that circle. So I can change the size of it just from a menu right here. I can just click and drag and change that size like that. I can change the position like this, but I don't usually change it in the shape part of it. I usually change everything in the transform portion, just because it gets really messy and confusing whenever you have position animation on 2 different layers. So you have to really be careful about kind of what you're doing there. But, you know, I can go also down to stroke. And let's say I change my mind, I want a stroke on it now. Well, I can change the width on that stroke, just like that. And I can change the color if I'd like to red or something else. I can change the caps, so I can actually limit, and I'll talk about this if we have time or questions about lines and stuff, but we can change the caps to round instead of square to get, you know, kind of a cool effect with that. We can have dashes. We can go to fill, and I can say at this point, I can just turn that opacity down to 0 if I change my mind, I don't want to fill anymore. Or the other thing I can do is I can actually click on the fill and then just hit delete. And if you wanted to add it back again, this is on all shape layers. There is this little tab up here that says add. And I can hit this arrow and I can say, oh, I want that fill back, or I want that stroke back, or maybe you want to have multiple strokes. You can do that. I don't know if you'd ever want multiple fills, but we'll see. What did I change? Okay, so fill. Let's say I want my fill back. And I can do the drop down and I will change that to green. All right, now I'm gonna close out some of these to reveal my transform. All right, so with our transform here, we have a few different options. You know, what I usually say is like, this is PSRO, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. I'd say 95% of motion graphics is in these 4 tabs right here: position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Certainly there's effects that you can add that do a lot more, but again, I'd say 95% of everything that you are going to need to do, especially to get beyond a basic understanding of the software, is in just these 4 things. So I can, you know, I can grab these numbers, drag them, like click and drag them, or I can also just type in numbers if I know where I want it specifically. So position, I can just move it just like that. I'm a very mathematical person when it comes to this stuff, so I really focus on the numbers, and probably more so than a lot of other people do. But to me, that's just kind of how my brain works. It just kind of helps to know what these numbers are. So like if I'm scaling something up, you won't really ever see a scale in anything that I do go to like 121%. I'm always like, okay, 125, because 121 is such a weird percentage. And then we have a circle here, so you're not going to see this, but I can also grab and drag the rotation. Oh, I actually will. And I'll explain why we do see that in just a second. But you can click and drag that just like so. What it does is basically this first number here is revolutions, and then we have a degree after that. So if we want it to spin 9 times, we can just say 9. If we want it to spin 9.5 times, so there's 360 degrees in 1 revolution, so we can do 180, and then it goes 9.5 spins basically. I'm just going to put that back to 0 for now. And then we have opacity. We can change how visible something is. So let's see. I guess one more thing, and then I'm going to open up the questions a little bit. So you'll see that, again, whenever I rotated this, it's rotating around this point in the middle here, and that's super weird. Basically, anytime that you make a shape, After Effects thinks that you want that, that anchor point or that pivot point in the center of the document, not necessarily the center of the shape. It's kind of stupid. But you can easily get it to the center of your shape with a couple different ways. So by clicking on your shape, the easiest way is we have our shape selected. We go all the way up to this tool right here. It's called the pan behind tool. And we can hit Control and double click on that pan behind tool, and you'll see that it just shifted that anchor point to the very center of our shape. Now I can also grab that anchor point with that pan behind tool selected, and I can change it anywhere I want. If I hold Control, I can snap it to different points. So if I wanted this in the corner, so if we had a square and I wanted this to be in the very corner of the square, I can hold Control and snap that anchor point to it. Sometimes there's reasons that you want your anchor point to be in different places. If you wanted something to rotate around something else, you can do that. For this case right here, a lot of times people will just be like, that's probably the center right around here. But you'll see that whenever I rotate this, I get this little thing right here. If my anchor point's in the center, then I shouldn't see any wobble like that, right? Just got my first record player yesterday and record today, and it's been cool. I don't know, I listened to a couple songs so far, but I don't know, I love just staring at it, and I'm like, that's amazing how just perfect of a circle it is and all that stuff.
You're gonna spend a lot of money on records, Matt.
I can tell already. It also, I don't know, it's crazy because since everything seems like it just comes out for just a little bit and then it's just hard to get after that.
Yeah.
Just all this, like my favorite albums are from like 10 to 20 years ago, and they're like on eBay for $150. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, I joke with my girlfriend, we got a record player back in November, and so between now and then, I probably spent the most money on food and rent, and then third is records.
That's crazy. I don't know. It's cool. I don't know. I look forward to it though, because this is a different kind of experience. And with my kids, they were getting excited about it too. So I'm like, that's cool. Like I remember the first time I ever heard a record, and I was like, that's such a cool experience. I want to be able to give that to them. So anyway, so record wobble, right? If we do that, so we need to make sure that our anchor points are in the center. So again, to do that easily, go to that pan behind tool, hold Control or Command if you're on Mac, I'm pretty sure. So I'm on PC. I'll get to that story at some point maybe, but basically I build my own computers, and we can build stuff that's really powerful for like a fraction of the cost. So that's why we use PCs. Anyway, that wasn't that long of a story, I guess. Okay, so now we have our shape here. So what we can do next is, let me do one more part and then I'll kind of open up the questions here. We're going to add keyframes. So the whole basis of After Effects and animation in general is keyframes. Essentially what that means is we have, any given action has two keyframes, position A and a position B. What we used to have to do is hand draw every single keyframe and then our in-between frames too. The thing that's great about After Effects is it automates the animation for us. So all we need to do is tell it keyframe A and keyframe B. So what I can do, basically anywhere that we have these little stopwatches are animatable transforms. So what I can do is, if I want to, again, I can move this position right here, but it's not actually animating it. Not until I hit the stopwatch. Once I hit that, it turns blue, and we have this little keyframe off to the left here. And you'll see in the timeline, it makes this little diamond dot thing right here. So that means that we now have a keyframe there. I can move this keyframe anywhere I want. If I'm selected on this keyframe, or if I am on this portion of the timeline, then I change it, it's going to actually manipulate that single keyframe. So what I can do then is, so let's say, I can also hit V, shortcut to get to your selection tool. And let's say I want to position this over here, because I want it to go from the left side of the screen to the right side. So left side right here, I have everything there. What I can do is, okay, so I can scrub to that 5-second mark right over here, and I can either make another keyframe by pressing this little add or remove keyframe button right here, or I can just start moving something. And whenever I start moving anything and then the stopwatch is enabled, it will automatically make a keyframe. So as I do that, you can see the path that it takes from keyframe A to keyframe B. So I can scrub back to the front And if I hit spacebar, we have made animation. And now we have made animation. So again, that's like 95% of what After Effects is right there, is we make these keyframes and give motion to things. Now I can say, okay, that's extremely slow. What I can do is I can actually grab this second keyframe here and I can drag it to wherever I want it to be. So let's say, oh, instead of 5 seconds, I want it to be 1 second. I can go back to the start with the scrubber and I can hit spacebar, and now you can see that it goes much faster than it did previously. And let's say that while I have it going from keyframe A to keyframe B, I want it to then scale up. So let's say at the second marker, at 2 seconds, let's say I want to animate the scale. So it's press the stopwatch on scale, and then I want to go to second 3, and then I want to scale that up to 200%. So I can just type in 200, and it automatically makes that other keyframe there. So whenever I play this, it goes from side A to side B, and then it animates its scale. Pretty incredible stuff, huh? Yep. This is how you win Emmy Awards. Okay, so, and then, well, again, rotation, we won't be able to see any rotation since the pivot's in the center there, but we could also animate that rotation by clicking the stopwatch and then changing whatever we want here. But again, it's important to drag this to where you want it to stop, and you can do that. And then at the very end, we will animate the opacity going from 100 to 0. As you can hear, my son is not a fan of that. I'm sure you hear this cries and screams in there, but he'll be all right. We'll teach him After Effects soon enough. All right, so I animated now every single track on here. So we're pressing play, we have position, scale, rotation, and then the opacity turns it off, right? And again, you can just drag any of these around. You can add more points to them now. So let's say for position, we want it to go here, and then we want it to come back. There's a couple different ways that we can do that. One, we can just copy this keyframe right here. So select that, Command or Control C, and then Command or Control V, and then it goes right back there. It will always paste your keyframe where your scrub head is. So now whenever I play this, it goes there and back, bounces back, scales up, and opacity down. And let's see. Yeah, does that make sense? You guys have any questions?
I don't know if this is like the right time to talk about it necessarily, but I had to, for one of my projects this past semester, one of the elements had to rotate. And once it got into revolutions, it started getting like really wonky. So trying to explain like what happened, like I had multiple keyframes in there. It was supposed to like rotate and then stop and then rotate again. And it maybe was probably like, I don't know, it probably paused for like 4 or 5 frames and then start rotating again. But in those 4 or 5 frames, it kind of like went forward a little bit and then backward and then forward and then back. It just like kind of like wobbled in the middle. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I just ended up scrapping the rotation, I think. But yeah, once it got into revolutions, I just like didn't really know why it was so screwed up.
So it's a decent time to ask that question. I'll answer it. After Effects is smart, but sometimes it can be kind of dumb. And it thinks that you always want the smoothest of animations. So it thinks that based on your keyframes, you want to do an arc or yeah, I guess let me just show you real quick here. So for instance, if I let's see here. So I'm gonna delete that third keyframe that I had for the position. And in the middle right here, I'm gonna just drag this up. So whenever I do that, it automatically makes this arc right here. Jake, are you still there? Your screen's frozen. Actually, both of you guys are. Are you guys there?
I'm here, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, just let me know if something's wrong. Anyway, so this is kind of a basic view of what's actually happening. So anytime that you add a third keyframe in between two other ones, it wants that arc. So, and real quick, you can also change the Beziers on this arc. So if you wanted, you can see that path there, and you can change keyframe A and keyframe B. And when we play that, it kind of does this little thing, right? But let me see real quick here. Let's see if I can try to recreate this. I can never do this whenever I need to. It doesn't, I don't think it happens with rotation as much as it does position. But basically what happens is, like, you have your keyframes. Let's say like, keyframe A, keyframe B, sorry, keyframe A, keyframe B, and then let's say you had keyframe C. So sometimes that animation looks like this, where it'll say, and then it'll overshoot that second one, and then it comes back. And I think that's what you're talking about happening. And what you can do is you can select all your keyframes. You can right click, and this is my favorite one here. There's a little button here called keyframe interpolation. Now, what this is saying is, so current settings, again, After Effects thinks that you want the smoothest of animations at all times. So in this case right here, you need to tell it, like, no, I want you to change your spatial interpolation, to linear, as opposed to Bezier or continuous Bezier or auto Bezier, because those ones right there, anytime you see Bezier with animation, it means smoothness. So let's change that to linear, put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. All right, and then we could say, okay, and then that problem would go away. Now it's going to say, okay, now there's no overshooting. So it goes from here to here, back to here, and it listens to exactly what you want. I don't know, I'm pretty sure that's what the answer is to your question, but I would have to see it specifically to be able to kind of answer. So if there's any ways you can recreate it, please do.
No, that makes sense, yeah, because when you described it as overshooting, that makes sense, because basically that's kind of what was happening in like I said, like in the 5 frames it was supposed to stop spinning. It just looked like it kind of like wanted to keep going and then came back, and then when the keyframe started, when the next action started to continue revolving, then it would start again. But just having that, I was like, why is it doing that? So knowing the keyframe interpolation,
yeah,
seeing that definitely makes sense of it.
That's a question that I get from every single student that I've ever had, because it always happens at some point or another. But it's this weird thing.
Yeah, it was tough because it was an online course, so it was like tough I was like, this isn't worth messaging my professor and having him come on, and it's like, I'll just scrap it. It wasn't an important element. So, but yeah, getting that answer, I think that would have been the right solve.
Cool. All right. Any other questions? James, anything? Okay, cool. Let's see where we're going here. So up next, let's go to lines and paths. Let me see. Yeah, I'll go there. So what I can do is, if I want to keep this layer, but I want to hide it, I can just do the drop down here, and then I can hit the eyeball, and that goes away. So let's say I now, like I said before, like I do a lot of our designing in Illustrator and Photoshop, probably more so in Illustrator than anything else, but you can design things inside of After Effects. I just don't recommend it, because you don't have the same control that you might have, because it's much easier to just design something in another program, and then you can easily bring it in with all the layers, and I can show you guys that too. So it's much easier just to kind of do things that way. And in general, like people know Photoshop or Illustrator before they ever learn After Effects, so that's why that's probably the workflow. But anyway, what we can do is up top here with the pen tool, we can click our pen tool. Similar to the shape tool, we have our fill and our stroke. I'm going to turn the fill off, and I'm going to change our stroke to blue, and then I'm going to change the thickness to 15 pixels. So similar to the pen tool in Photoshop or Illustrator, you can click a point here, and then you can click and drag to make a Bezier. You can hold Shift to make it perfect 45-degree angles. And I'm just going to make a couple little points here. And you can also hold spacebar. When you hold spacebar, you can move that point to wherever you want while you have it, while you're clicking and holding on it. All right, so and that should do it. Okay, so what we can do with this, also we can click on these things, hit enter, and we can rename them. Let's see, enter. Okay. So on our line, and we can change this thickness now just from up here on the top. We don't necessarily have to do the drop down to do it. We can change the color this way as well, but we'll go through the drop down, go to contents and shape. So basically a path is a shape. So it still calls it a shape even though it is just a path or just a line. And we can go to the drop down on path. We can actually animate the points on our path here. So if I click stopwatch right here, I drag it here. Sometimes like everything is selected in these kinds of things right here. So usually what I do is I'll hold Control or Command, and you can see it changes the mouse to like a marquee selection. And I'll select that point that I want, and then I can easily drag that and move it. So you'll see that's our path animation right there. Fun stuff. I'm going to delete those. But and now let's say I want to go down to stroke. And this is, I want to show you what I was talking about before. We can animate this path. This little add tool right here that I was telling you about before. We can go to add, and then we can go to trim paths. And trim paths, what it does, it will trim the path. It adds a new layer of transforms in here. Whenever I do the drop down on that, we have our start, we have our end, and we have our offset. So right now we see no change at all. But if I change this 100% to 0%, you can see it kind of snakes through. Right? I can change that to 15%, and then I can change the offset, and it will swim through that path. And it'll start back over again when it gets over there. But I can also animate that, we'll say 0 to 100. Whenever I play that, we get something like that. And I can also have it writing off by animating the start now. So start at 0%, and then a little bit after it, I want it to go. So whenever I play that, it does this kind of thing right here. Yep. Let's see. And that's pretty much the lines and paths here. There's a lot of different things that you can do with paths. Like you can write text on them. I don't know if I want to get to that just yet, but you can also tell objects that you wanted to animate along a path. Let me see if I can, let me write that down. We'll try to get to that if I have time. All right. But for the most part, between the shapes and the paths and the one other thing is going to be text. That's, again, a lot of the visual components that you're dealing with in here. So to make text, I can go to the horizontal type tool right here. I can either click and release. Whenever I do that, it will not make a text box. It will just write straight forever and always until you hit enter and want it to go to the next line. So in some cases you want there to be a text box. In some cases you just want just the text to write. It's tough to tell you what those circumstances are, but so by clicking, I can just then start writing. And then I can click off of there and I can click and I can drag and it makes a text box to that specific area. So then you know exactly what you're dealing with. I'll go to this one right here. So if I want to change the size, I can just click on that layer. I can go over to our character panel. I can change our size. I can change our font. I can change in paragraph here. I can tell it that I want it to start on the left here. Yeah, the same settings that you would get whenever it comes to Photoshop or Illustrator, but you can do that. And there are, at this point it becomes a layer. Then when you do the drop down, you can see you have a transform. You can animate this text anywhere you want to, animate the opacity of it kind of coming into frame. Actually, also something else, if these little checkerboard thing is getting too busy for you, you can go into our viewport here and this little checkerboard is selected. If I hit that again, it turns the background black. Sorry, I probably should have done that a while ago, but now I can't see the text, so I'll select that. I will go into this color panel here and I will change it to white. All right, so you'll see that whenever we do that drop down for text, it brings up some different options of things that we can animate as well. We can animate the source text. So if I animate this, I can then come over here and I can change it to whatever I want. And then whenever I play this back, you'll see that it changes the text. It animates that text that was in there. There are more complicated ways that you can actually like make it look like it's cycling through and then changing text. But you'll see that in this case right here, it makes these square frames. So there's essentially three kinds of keyframes. There are your standard linear keyframes. Those are the normal diamonds. Then you have your hold keyframes, which is these squares right here. Again, with this option, it only does hold keyframes, so you don't have a choice when it comes to the source text. But if you were to do that on, actually, let me hide these real quick and bring up this first one right here. So what I can do is I can select keyframes. I can right click and I can say, nope, I want to toggle hold keyframe. So when I do that, watch what happens now. It just does this little cut kind of thing. It doesn't actually animate. And I can do undo there. The other thing that I can do is I can do an eased keyframe. Basically, anytime we have these linear keyframes, everything moves really robotically and doesn't really feel that great. It feels like a machine just kind of made this automated thing. So sometimes what we want to do is we want to add eased keyframes. So what we can do is I could just select all of this. Actually, I'm gonna select all of these keyframes here, and I'm gonna hit F9. And F9, you can also go right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. And what that will do is it'll ease our keyframes. So it'll make it so we do slow in and slow out. So it kind of abides by the rules of nature where nothing goes 0 to 60 in 0 seconds. It takes time to accelerate and it takes time to decelerate. this one little thing alone will make your animations better than so many of the people out there, because especially people that are learning, they generally just use linear keyframes. But I think that things like this are really important. So now whenever I play this, you see how much smoother that is. It's crazy. Now there are ways that we can adjust the amount of ease on these keyframes. What I can do, there's two things. I'm not going to show you too much into this, but on our little on our timeline, we have this thing called a graph editor. Honestly, I don't use this very much, not as much as other animators do. But whenever we click on this, you'll see that it will. Oops, let me get to our. I'm gonna hit position first, and then go to our timeline, and then we can see the actual animation that's happening over time. So up top we have distance, or on the left side of our graph we have distance, and then the horizontal part of our graph here is amount of time, and the vertical is amount of movement. So we can actually select some of these things, start moving them around. We can adjust the curves on them a little bit. When we do this right here, and I play this, you see that first part right here, how much ease it has to it. It's kind of difficult to tell. Let me delete these keyframes. So you see it's really slow in, but it looks really cool. So you can adjust that from here, and you can adjust how slow it starts as well. So it does this little cool thing right here. Again, I don't use this very much because there's another way to do this. What I like to do is I'll select my keyframes. I will right click. I will go to keyframe velocity. And again, like I was saying, I'm more of a numbers person. Numbers just make more sense. So what I can do is I can tell it how much I want to ease on when it's incoming to that keyframe and when it's outgoing of that keyframe. So let's say, I mean, we don't have any animation going into it, so this really doesn't matter right here. But if I say I want it to ease 80% on both sides, and I say okay, I can play this, and we have an 80% ease on both sides. I can select them both again, go back into keyframe velocity, and change this to 99%, which is the highest you can do. And whenever I play this, you can see it does that little kind of thing. I'm going to take these keyframes out a little bit so we can see a little bit more of the animation. There you go. That's a better example here. So you see how slow it starts and how slow it gets to that frame B. And we can put ease keyframes on anything. We can put it on that scale as well, as I did already. And you can put it on opacity too. It's a little more difficult to tell eased opacity, but sometimes you need that. If you want something to like really subtly start to fade out and then just completely go away, you might use it for that. Is this all making sense so far? Cool.
Hey Matt,
Okay.
quick
Yeah.
question. When you're using that keyframe velocity where you're setting essentially your beginning and end velocities, does that also change the way the graph editor represents that as well? So those are all kind of aligned?
Yeah, it does. Let's see here. So going into this again, I'm pretty sure I can I can right click on it in here, keyframe velocity, and let's say I'll change this to 10%, and watch what happens. Whenever I hit enter, watch what happens to that chart. You see it shifts it all the way over here. So I can see there's like not a whole lot of ease kind of on the landing point now. There's a lot at the beginning, but not very much once we get into there.
Yeah, that's good to know because I've always had issues with like, I'll try and set up a consistent easing within the graph editor, and then I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm like, well, that looks like the last one that I did. And it's good to have those numbers feel like it's always a 10.
Yeah, that's
nice.
So I guess another reason that I like using those numbers is because it's easier to kind of repeat certain patterns. I guess in a lot of what I do, I'm looking for patterns when it comes to brands, when it comes to those kinds of movements. So in any given animation, we almost have like our own like style guide. So we might say, okay, like we'll do like a test animation for a certain segment first, and maybe it's like 5 or 10 seconds, maybe it's 15 seconds, and then we'll just keep adjusting that, and then we'll say, okay, this 15 seconds looks great. Now we want to apply that to the next 2.5 minutes that we have for this. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, all keyframes, unless there's a reason, will have a 80% keyframe velocity. So we know across the board we're doing that. And what I try to do, were either of you guys, Jake, you were in Draplin's workshop. James, were you in his workshop?
I popped in for the first one, but I
Okay.
couldn't make it to the second.
So some of the principles that he goes by, I also go by in kind of a similar way, where it's, okay, we either do 80% or let's have that. And like, we're either doing 80% keyframe velocity or 40% keyframe velocity. Like I might do something like that to kind of have these numbers off like to the side somewhere. And then I might also say, okay, some of these movements are taking 14 frames. Like if I have similar movements throughout an animation, then I keep track, like, okay, 14 frame animation, 14 frames at 80% velocity. So like I might put it on a post-it and just put it there. Jake.
Is there an easy way to, okay, so say it looks like, I'm going to say there are about like 30 frames for that position movement. Is there an easy way to like select keyframes and then have it tell you how many frames there are between each instead of having to like count out every single one?
That's a good question. I don't think so, but usually what I do is I'll just set my scrubber to where I need it to be, and then I'll just move the keyframe to it so it snaps against it. I'll also pay attention to the time code on the left here. If you're zoomed in enough, it'll show you how many frames it's been. So like right here it says 20, right here it says 20. So this is frame 20, and then this is 1 second in frame 20, 2 seconds in frame 20. So I usually go by those. But a lot of times, honestly, what I might do is just copy this animation and then paste it however many times I need to on other things. Because you can take that, any of these keyframes, you can take that and you can apply it to something else. So selecting, I'm going to copy, I selected on position, hit controller command C, and let's say I want to make a square in here. Anytime that I make a shape, I have to be very careful, because if I'm selected on a shape and I make a shape, it's going to think that I want two shapes inside of the same layer. And rarely do you ever want that. So you always have to make sure you click off first. And then we'll just put that right here. I'm going to go up to the pan behind tool, control, double click. And then I can, just with that layer selected, I can do controller command V. And it automatically applies that animation starting at where my scrubber was. So it starts that animation right here because that's where I was started. So whenever I go down, you can see that. So when I start at the beginning here, and you can see that since I centered these points on both of these things and I pasted that animation on there, what it's looking at, you can see the position here. It's looking at pixel count. So if I was to type in 960 by 540, I know that's the exact center point of the document right there, because it's just dividing by 2 my vertical and my horizontal pixels. So that's kind of another big reason why you want to always make sure that in general you kind of default to centering those anchor points. Yeah. Does that answered the question, right? Great. Sometimes you start answering something and then you start thinking of something else and you're just like, well, let's go with it, man. Let's just see what happens. Yeah, any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to try to go for about another 20 minutes or so. And let me see here. I guess real quick, let me just do this. I want to show you guys how to import another document, and then you can ask any questions about just whatever you want at that point. So what I will do, I have a design already made inside of Illustrator. This is a client project, a declined concept here. Actually, I have this, need to rearrange this just slightly. Okay. And basically what I have in Illustrator is I have everything is in layers here. I have the guy, I have the sun, the birds, the silos, each of them, the corn, the grass, the chicken, and the ground plane right there. In normal situations, I would actually break apart each one of these birds. Or I would honestly probably just bring over one bird, animate it, and then I can duplicate that bird as many times as I want. But in this case right here, we'll say this. So I will then go over to After Effects. I'm going to just double click in my project panel here. And I mean, I could also right click and you can new composition, a new folder, import. And actually, let me just do this. So we'll say File, and then I'm going to go to my desktop, find my file. Now there's some options down here. If you wanted to, I guess there's two separate options. It's asking, how do you want to import this? Do you want to import it as footage, or do you want it composition? If you import it as footage, it will bring it in as a flat image that you do not get to play with any of the layers. So you always need to be careful that you press the right button here. If you bring it in as footage and it's still an Illustrator file, it's still vector, so you can make it as big as you want, but it will bring it in as vector layers if you hit composition. And you can tell if you wanted to create a composition, which in this case right here, I do. So then I will hit import. And whenever I double click on that composition that it made automatically, you'll see that I get this. I get all of this stuff laid out in the layers. You see that I don't have a background, right? I didn't put a white background in Illustrator, so it didn't show up here. So what I can do is I can either do it up in the project panel or I can do it in the timeline. In the blank space, I can right click, I can do new solid. And a solid is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a blank color. So down here with color, I can tell it what I want to do. I want it to be white, so I will say okay. And then we're just gonna click and drag that down to that bottom level there. So it works very similarly with Photoshop as well, where if you want to, if you have a document that has the layers, you just need to make sure you're bringing it in as a composition. So with this right here, now I'm not going to do character animation because that's a whole different ball game right there. But what I can do is, let's say I wanted this to like animate in, like, let's say I wanted everything to just kind of animate in from nothing. Like I want to start with white and then I want it all to animate to this design. So I'm going to select all of this, and there are shortcuts to get to certain animation tracks. If I hit P, it brings up the position only for everything. So very rarely do you want to bring up like every single transform because it just gets to be a mess. I can hit S and it brings up everyone's scale, or just the one scale if you wanted. R for rotation, and for opacity, you guessed it, T. Yeah, it's weird. Transparency, I guess, is what they go by. But so T is for opacity. So I generally am like cycling through those things right there. But for this right here, I'm going to hit P, and I'm going to scrub to where I want it to end, where I want the animation to end. So let's say at 2 seconds, and then I'm going to start the stopwatch. With all of them selected, if I hit that stopwatch, it sets a keyframe on every single one of these. And then I'm going to go back to the beginning. And now I'm going to start working one by one here. So I'm going to hit V to get back in selection mode here. So starting with the guy, I can just animate. Let's actually have him animate from the side like this. And since I'm right here, it's making a keyframe automatically. I'll go to the sun. Does something like that. Actually, I don't know if we'll have time. No, I'm just going to show you this for right now. I'm just going to move everything off screen real quick. The birds. And then we have this silo, the other silo, the other silo, the corn, the barn, and we'll do the grass from the bottom. And I'm holding shift as I'm dragging these things to keep it in alignment, so I can have it go straight down or straight over to the side. And then for the ground, I'm just gonna have that coming from the bottom. So now whenever I go to fit to 100% here, so whenever I play this, we have everything coming in just like so. It looks pretty ugly just right now, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these keyframes, and I'm going to hit F9 to put an ease on them. Now, the default ease is, I think it's 16% ease with, 33% ease. So sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes it's just not. So now whenever I play this, there you go, it's starting to look a little bit better. But actually, I'm going to select all these first keyframes here, and I want these to be linear. I don't want these to be eased. So I'm going to select all of these and hit Control and click, and it converts all those keyframes from ease to linear. So now whenever I play it, it just comes in a little bit snappier. So what I can do at this point is, let's say I want each thing to kind of come in at a different time. Well, there's a couple ways I can do this. One, I can just grab this whole layer in the timeline here, and I can just shift this around as I want it to be. Or I can select the keyframe and start shifting that where I want it to be. For this case right here, I'm just going to start shifting layers around a little bit. I know the last thing that I want to come in is the guy, so we'll just kind of give ourselves an endpoint there. I'm just kind of being a little bit random about this, but okay. So now whenever I hit play from the beginning, look at that. Still not the prettiest, but we're getting there, right? Yeah, I guess at this point, I just want to open up to questions for you guys and see if there's something specific that you want to know about. Let's see what you got.
I guess I should have came more prepared with questions. Trying to think of something.
I guess. Well, let me ask you this, James. How much? What's your current knowledge of After Effects and animation?
I want to say I have a pretty decent grasp of like foundational stuff. I've been getting into more like use of null objects and track mats to try and get a little bit more complex with some of my animations, depending on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Huh. I mean, what I'd like to do, I guess, at this point is, again, I don't. Is there anything specific that you've been trying to do with? I guess let me ask you that then. What specifically would you like to be able to do when it comes to motion graphics or animation? Same question to you, Jake.
I think one of the things that always attracted me to animation was the idea of telling more like narrative driven stories, which like I think largely is, yeah, it's not necessarily always something that is, or the core of it is probably derived before you even get into After Effects per se. Um, but with that being said, trying to get into like maybe more complex, maybe complex might be the wrong word, more organic or natural feeling like character animations, kind of being able to manipulate forms in a way that just feels more natural. And a lot of times, whenever I messed around with like Duick, doing like character rigging, um, and I would always kind of hit these walls where like if I'm doing like IK rigging with their bone system, things would start to feel really robotic versus like rubber hose. Things are always like cartoonish and
Yeah.
wiggly and squash and stretch kind of thing. So that was a long way of saying I wish I could be a little bit better at making like things that felt a little bit more professional and cleaned up when I have like characters or human forms kind of in the scene.
Characters are definitely tough. There's a lot to that. Yeah, rigging is a big thing when it comes to animating characters, where essentially you have to, I guess in a way, give bones to a character, and then you have to tell those bones how they move with each other. You need to say, okay, whenever I rotate my shoulder, what happens to my elbow? Like my elbow needs to come along for the ride too. And there's no simple answer to that other than practice, I feel like.
It's fair.
But I guess what I can do real quick is, and I didn't talk about this at all, is parenting. I'm gonna bring my kids in. No, I'm just kidding. Let me see here. And that idea of parenting is, let's go back into the test here. Well, let me make another arm right here. Let's say this is the character's arm. Control double click. Actually, in this case right here, I want the anchor point to be at the shoulder. So I'm going to hold control, or click off it first and then click on it again, and then hit control so that whenever I rotate, I'm going to hit R so I can get to this. You can see it kind of swings. We'll say this is the torso. Sorry, I got quite the imagination. You may not see that, but I do. So let's kind of put it right here. So right now, that square leaves without it. What I can do is I can tell this square or arm to, I want it to kind of attach to that torso. So this little whirlywinds thing right here, the pick whip, you can grab it and you can say, okay, you always grab the child and then you force it onto the parent. So then you say to the torso. So now it's going to say, okay, anywhere torso goes, I want arm to go along with it. So now when we play that, they stick together. But now we can also, we can animate the rotation of this as well. So this was like a jump or something like that. And one of the things that I want to get into next week is a little bit more of kind of two things that you've talked about already. One is storytelling, and I think maybe another way of saying that you're looking to create something more organic is to really dive into the principles of animation and figure out how to use those inside of After Effects. And that's the other big thing that I want to talk about next week. So easing is just one of the 12 principles. So if you can start using multiple principles inside of a single animation, that's whenever things start to feel like real. But let's say hold on a second. You can also hit U, the letter U, and it'll show me all the tracks with animation on it. There we go. So sometimes I'm trying to, let's see, look at another track. But like, let's say I want it to, in anticipation, I want it to like reach back and then jump forward, right? So I have the reach back, and then I want the jump forward to kind of do something like this. So whenever I play it, it doesn't look great right now, but let's see, I'm gonna select these all and just hit F9 to ease them. Kind of funny. A little exaggerated there. So what I might do is something like this, just extend that out a little bit. What's happening here is like, as I'm doing this, it's just leaving too slow. So I need to change the keyframe velocity on the torso from 99 to, I don't know, let's do 20. So now whenever I do this, it's a little bit better. So you can see just that little bit of him going back first and then forward, like adds a lot to kind of the personality and the character of everything. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Any other questions? Jake, I know you got something.
Well, so my biggest thing, like when I was taking my animation course in the spring, the overwhelming thing for me is just like having so many moving elements. So I think, cause like I was, obviously like I do most of the work inside Illustrator, and then we were creating animations, like not storyboards. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, we were basically doing narratives, and that was how toward the end of the semester and at the beginning of the semester, we were doing, simpler stuff like logo animations. And for me as a designer first, I feel like doing logo animations, like if I'm going to really get into After Effects, those, animating the logos that I make is going to kind of be like the gateway drug into doing more animation work. So the big thing for me, like it's a small collection, but I have like a collection of logo animations on Dribble. And I just love watching how these designers, unveil these logos. And obviously, like, you said sometimes, brands will come to you with assets. So not all of these logos necessarily are things that these animators design, but they have a knack for figuring out how to bring it on screen in a creative way. And so for me, going forward as a designer, like I want to be able to make that part of the package that I give to my clients. Like, hey, I'm going to create you a logo, and then I'm going to have an animation that you can put on any video assets on Instagram. Because like you said, like with the marketing background that I have, like I know that motion, especially on Instagram, is what's going to drive more interactions. Not the right word, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I think for me, it's more just about like, just in the designs that I do, like I like to create things that are very like elegant, clean, and I guess like as simple as possible while remaining effective. So I'm kind of, I guess, like the opposite end of the spectrum of James. Like character animation is very, very interesting to me, and I got to do a little bit of it last spring, but it also was just like so out of my wheelhouse, and I was like, I don't know realistically if I'm going to use this. So yeah, I mean, like, go ahead.
Yeah, I got tons of things I can say about this. All right, so first of all, the idea of, are you familiar with Pentagram Design Agency in New York City? They only, from my understanding anyway, they only reveal logos to clients when they're animated. They do not show them still when they first present them, because they want them to feel something a little bit more than just sliding over a piece of paper that's like, yep, these are what we designed. And it's much more impactful. Whenever people just see the logo by itself, like they could be like, oh, that's cool. But whenever they feel the meaning behind things, so like they always like build things on, and they're like, in the animation, it could be like, we're going to use lines because it signifies unity or something like that. I don't know. But they only present things that way, and they do it for a reason. And I think it's a really damn good reason, because it helps tell that story that they're trying to tell, right? Which that idea of story, again, that's what separates, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but there are at least 5,000 kids in India right now that can go inside of After Effects and they can make keyframes, and they can do a really good job of doing it. And I know that because so much of the stuff that I learn is on YouTube, and that's who it is. It's like these Indian kids, and it's like, damn, like they get it, like, or they get the software. But what they don't get, and I think it's probably just an age thing, is that the importance of what we're doing is not making keyframes. It's telling that story. It's providing some kind of emotion to people. Because yeah, so one challenge is learning the software and making the keyframes, but that's just the first part. That will never make anyone special, like learning a software, because it's just a tool, right? It's the same as a hammer. Like anybody can use a hammer. Like yeah, there's some people that are idiots and hit their fingers with hammers. I've done it a few times, but it's, you know, knowing how to use a tool is the entry point. And then after that, then it's like, okay, well, how are we going to tell a good story with this? So that kind of combines that idea of how Pentagram uses it. They're using it as a story tool, not so much as a just show them something in motion because it's cool. Because that's what's going to engage with people even more. And, you know, depending on how you make something, I guess sort of like I was talking about at the beginning, that idea of just breathing life into something that otherwise didn't have any. That little bit of life that you can add to things sometimes. Like if I go to that scene that I had of the farmer feeding the chicken, if I just added birds flying around in that, it would immediately already feel like there's so much life already in that. Then all of a sudden now I'm adding like breathing into the farmer. There's even more. The corn maybe starts swaying a little bit. It's like these little things that like doesn't necessarily take a lot of time to do it. But it's things that can help tell that story. So it's like you have to think about those individual elements. And like if I was thinking about the corn, okay, well, how much do I move the corn? Do I just make it move a little bit? No, like, do we want it to be a really windy day or just like this calm, just soothing, kind of quiet, peaceful day? So it's like those are the questions that you need to ask. You need to ask those questions when you're branding anything, whether that's, you know, even if you're designing something, you should be asking those questions. But I think that those same laws apply to motion graphics, where whatever you're doing, it should always help tell that story. You're never just moving something for the sake of moving it. So again, going back to that idea of easing. So it tells a different story whenever I have linear keyframes or like crazy eased keyframes. So you got to think about those kinds of things of like, okay, it does feel much more organic and lifelike when I have a good ease on there. When I put too much ease on there, it kind of feels funny. It feels like a comedy, you know? When I don't have any ease at all of a sudden now it's like a robot. But like, you know, so you got to think about those things. Like I just finished up a project for IBM that we actually dove into that idea of like, we want it to feel like a machine. Like it's this new like AI technology that they're building. And it's like, you know, we had things on screen that were like kind of moving like that. And it's like, that's it right there. Like, I mean, even for that, we didn't use completely eased keyframes. We still had a little bit of ease or linear keyframes. We did not use linear keyframes. We had just a small amount of ease instead. Because even robots, like it still takes them time to accelerate, you know, just not nearly as much as more organic, natural feeling things. So, you know, if I'm telling a story about this farmer, I'm not going to have these really fast movements of just things going everywhere. I want things to feel more peaceful, like I am on a farm or something, you know, just a little bit slower. So I don't know, just being able to tell a story with what you're doing. And some of the best logo animators, that's what they're doing. They're paying attention to those brands. They're reading all 150 pages of these brand guidelines and saying, okay, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense to do. Like it's easy. Well, it's not easy, but like in this case, if you're here, I'll say it's easy to make stuff that looks cool visually, but it's a whole different level to make people feel something from what you're doing. That to me, that's the ultimate. My favorite projects that I've ever done are the things that I've, you know, when you can make people laugh hysterically or even cry, like God, that's what we're doing, you know, like to just, I don't know, man, to nudge people even a little bit in their lives to just feel something different. Like, I don't know, it's an incredible feeling to be able to do that. And I don't know, you make people cry, it feels bad at first, but at the same time, it's like to just affect somebody's emotion. I don't know. To me, that's, again, like I said, I think that's what we're all doing, but some of us, it just takes a longer time to realize it. Yeah, but again, I also feel that way about print. I feel that way about logos. I feel like, I mean, a logo is not going to make somebody cry, most likely. Maybe, I don't know. But you still have to think about those things. On every move that you make is to tell a story. And if there isn't a story, sorry, I know I'm kind of going here, but this is me right here. It's the same idea of going to the movie theater. Whenever you guys remember movie theaters, um, going to the movie theater, and then you go see an action movie, and it's like, oh, that was cool. You see one of the Marvel movies, one of the earlier ones, maybe, I don't know, and you're like, oh, that was cool. I really liked it. But then you go home, and then it's gone, right? It's past. But you go see a movie that is really meaningful or made you feel something a little bit deeper than just, I don't know, oh, cool. And you're just thinking about it for days or weeks, and I'm not saying that action movies are bad, but at the same time, like, that's the difference. To me, I think you can combine both things. You have movies like Interstellar, which is probably my favorite movie of all time. Great visual effects, but just an incredible story that, for years, I'm just like, this is amazing. Like, I can't poke any holes in this. Like, I don't know. Like, obviously it's ridiculous, but at the same time, it's just, it's a really cool story that's pretty emotional. And I don't know, makes people think beyond just that part right there.
Yeah, yeah, everything that you're saying is like spot on with how I feel just about design in general. I mean, I feel like it's, we do these things, like you said, like the creative suite is just the tool. And I think there's kind of like, there's a learning curve between being able to use the tool and being able to use it in a meaningful way. So like maybe not every pixel of the design, but a majority of the design, just like a majority of the animation, it's meaningful. It has purpose. So maybe you're not saying like, oh, I'm doing this to evoke the emotion of making someone cry, but I want it to move the viewer. So yeah, I guess the big thing for me is like, ascending that curve in After Effects, where like I feel really strong about my skills in Photoshop and Illustrator, so that I can use them both programs purposefully. Now it's time to climb that mountain in After Effects, and I guess just like for me, it just feels like a very steep mountain to climb because it's such a robust program, and there's so many things possible. But yeah, I mean, and Pentagram I think is a great example. All their stuff is, I mean, obviously is just like next level. But that's kind of the end goal, right? Is to be able to emulate, I guess, their formula in my own work, and so that when I am presenting things to clients, it elicits that emotional reaction that you're looking for.
Yeah, and there's two things about what you said there. One is this idea of stealing from what already works, right? Like stealing formulas from people, like, oh man, they're sharing their stuff in video like that. That's pretty brilliant. I mean, that's what creativity is. It's being able to combine things that you didn't really think about before, right? And that's what they did. They combined logo animation or logo design with animation. Like, what happens when we start doing those kinds of things? To me, stuff like that is just, I believe that that's the way it should be with everyone. I think all design companies should be presenting things with animation. Maybe not to the extent that Pentagram does, but like just some kind of movement, because branding is all about feeling, right? So it's like, well, part of branding is motion. So why not have that motion in that presentation of a new brand, right? So that's one thing. The second thing I'll say is it takes time. Like it's just, I'm not saying it takes 10,000 hours, but it takes time to be able to get to a certain point with this stuff. When I first started, I very much was a technician. I was really good at the software, and I prided myself on that for a little too long until I realized that, until I started making the things that people started feeling things. And I was like, oh my God, I've been missing this the whole time. Like I completely overlooked it. So I'm like, before my conversations were about like, oh, what plugin did you use to do that? Oh, that's cool. What's the frame rate on that? Like, oh, it's super 4K, whatever. I haven't had a conversation like that in years. I had a client call yesterday, and the guy's like, I got to be careful because I don't think he's going to listen to this, but he's like, okay, so I'm like, all right, well, what are you looking for? Like, what are your expectations? He's like, okay, so we want to do a TikTok video. We want it to be 1920 by 10. I'm like, whoa. Like, the technical stuff is irrelevant right now. Like, let's not start there. Like, there's a story that you guys want to tell, right? Like, what is it that you want to do? Like, what do you want people to feel? Like, those conversations to me just completely outweigh what plugin should we use for this, or like, what frame rate are we supposed to use? They always tell you if you're supposed to use something specific, but otherwise I'm gonna do whatever I want. It's taken time to get to that point, though. I will definitely say that. I mean, I've been doing this now for maybe 15 years. I think I started in 2005, so I guess 15 years, man. And I don't know, you have these kind of revelations along the way. I think this happens with any creative field. And I think, without trying to get too philosophical with this stuff, it's like what Alan Watts says, where he says that you're under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. I've taken that very seriously the last decade now, where if I want to change up what I'm doing, I'll just change it up. Like whenever I was in Los Angeles, I was doing a lot of visual effects work. I was like, oh, this is so cool, working on these big projects. But I was like, but I'm having more fun animating stuff, like doing motion graphics. So I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what I'm gonna do now. And everyone was like, wait, what? And I was like, I'm moving to Ohio. And they're like, what? I'm like, listen, like, I don't really care. Like, I'm gonna do what I think is best. And I mean, I've been in Ohio now. I mean, I was born here, but I've been back for 6 years now. And it's been one of the best decisions for me, because it's like, okay, now I get to live at my own pace, and I get to do things my way. I get to take more risks. And again, that kind of gets us a little off topic here, but what I'll say is, like, I guess one of the big things that helped me was sketching, right? And Draplin talked about this too, where I sketch for animation. Like, I'll sketch, okay, I want this to move from here to here. And it's like, sometimes I'll have like 9 versions of a storyboard before I actually get to the real storyboard. So like, I just started a new book here, so I don't think I have any, but I actually have kind of one right here. So like, I'm like thinking, I'm like, okay, I want to go from like the straight line to this little orbit looking thing. So like, I figure out this stuff. The moment you try to let After Effects figure something out, you will just stare at the screen and you will waste an hour or two just trying to like figure out, like, how am I supposed to make this work? So to me, that's where I'm like, okay, I spend a lot of time sharpening my axe before I try to jump into any software, whether I'm designing something or animating something. I want to know exactly what I'm doing before I go there. And the second that, well, I'd say I give myself maybe 30 seconds. If I ever staring at the screen for 30 seconds, then it's because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing and I need to go back to the sketchbook. So I turn the monitors off, let's go to the sketchbook and let's try to keep working on it that way. I mean, that's not necessarily for everybody. That's how my mind works. So that's what works best for me. And I think that when you can start solving some problems on paper and then move it to the software for the actual like solution, it's just, I don't know, a better process and easier to kind of comprehend what you're doing at that moment.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I carry my field notes all the time, so I'm always sketching. I guess like that could be interesting to kind of see next week, and obviously if this, you know, if James thinks this benefits him as well, just kind of seeing like I really enjoy taking, like, I love watching Skillshare videos or YouTube videos. I think maybe long form like Skillshare better, because I like seeing designers, whether it be, you know, motion, like whatever, you know, medium they're working in. I like seeing the thought process. So like you were saying in that farmer animation, you're like, oh, I could make the corn wave in the breeze. So I guess maybe kind of like, again, like if James thinks that this would be beneficial too, like maybe diving into one of your completed animations, or like going into the farmer animation and saying like, hey, okay, so we've got the basics here. Now I want to add the ambiance that will make it feel, you know, that will evoke the emotions, right? So, and then kind of like taking this, you know, showing kind of the steps, you know, the practical application, saying like, okay, here's how I'm making the corn wave. Because in my mind, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, corn doesn't wave, like it's not just like that, you know, it's not like linear like that. So maybe then like puppet warp is something that I think I used it a little bit last spring. And I think James probably, like for character animation too, like I know that's probably a big part of it. So just kind of figuring out like, okay, I only need the top part of that corn to wave a little bit. So yeah, I think that'd be really beneficial to dive into next week.
Definitely. I'll see what projects I have that I can kind of share some specifics about. And if there's any specific project that you want to know about, let me know.
Yeah, I'll go through what's I have here.
Madebythings.com.
Made by Things, yeah. So I can go through that. And I also, like, I've got like a dribble bucket of like some animations too that like I could throw into. But yeah, I mean that's kind of, I think you hit the nail on the head with everything. So now it's just kind of like, yeah, I just like picking apart how other designers think to kind of be able to figure out how to apply that to my own work and figure out the you know, formulas that work best for me. And because I'm still such a beginner in After Effects, like it helps even more kind of to pick apart your thinking.
For sure, yeah. Let's do that. I mean, I didn't have a whole lot planned for next time, just to see where you guys wanted to kind of take things. But I guess what I would also like to do is I want to see some of the things that you guys are making. I don't have any specific assignment here, but I'd love to just see some kind of animation, and then we can kind of talk about it a little bit, and we can, if you, maybe you can share your After Effects file, and then I can jump in there and start kind of showing you what I would do when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, I would love to tell you a little bit more about kind of the pre-production process, especially for me specifically. I guess, you know, real quick here before we go, I'll show you. I do have one video that I kind of showed, because it's not the prettiest of things, but it's how I work. So last year we did a short film, and let's see. Oh, damn it. I'm getting there eventually. So I did like a making of. I'll share my screen here. So this was kind of the making of. This top left, that's me. I did these in the top left. For me, this was, I was relatively hands-off for animation on this one. I had a girl named Yiffy. She did the illustrations. And then Colin, he's the employee that I have at Made by Things. He did the animation. And I was kind of there for creative direction and story. So if I play through this without the sound, you can kind of get a decent idea of where we start with something, and where it kind of ends up, like over the course of this, where again, it's just, to me, I didn't think that, I was literally doing these just for myself, so I can tell, like, okay, how does the story need to go next? Like, do we cut to this? Do we cut to that? I don't need to develop things at such a high level to be able to tell what the story is. I think that's kind of a waste of time for some people. Like these storyboard artists that like that just they'll be working on like perfect shading and shadows for everything. I'm like, we don't use that for the final. Like we're just using that for the ideas. And to me, this process of being able to show from sketch to final, like how this can work, this is just my way, it's not the way of everybody, but I think it's one way that works. But yep. Yeah, any other, I could do one more question maybe if we can make it a quick one, unless you guys are good.
Actually, I just want to ask on that. I think I watched that video a while ago. I was wondering, so when you guys actually did those animations, were you doing a lot of your character animations in like hand-drawn frames that you then lined up um, with your like animated After Effects files, or are you doing it?
For that one specifically, it's primarily hand-drawn animation. We
Mm-hmm.
used Adobe Animate to get the rough animations, or not the rough animation, like to get the actual like outlined animations. But
Mm-hmm.
then we actually animated them in Photoshop, so we could use the brushes. So we took, so we started with the illustrations, and then we make those illustrations move in Adobe Animate, and then over to Photoshop where we used the brushes and got everything, and then to After Effects where we kind of assembled the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there was very many, if any, keyframes made inside of After Effects. There was a couple, but most of that was all hand-drawn animation.
Gotcha. Yeah, because when I watch stuff like that, I'm like, the fluidity and the natural movement within that really, usually doing stuff in After Effects, like it doesn't feel the same way. It kind of, I feel like sometimes it takes away from the story, right? Where you're like, well,
Yeah.
the way that arm moved, like kind of felt wonky and like kind of takes you out of what's going on in
Yeah.
the scene.
What I'd love for you to do for next week, if you're able to be there, is show me some of these examples of stuff that you really like. Both of you. I think that would be really cool. Just talk about some of those smaller things that maybe you see that you're like, man, I want to be able to make that. I can't say that I'll be able to do it exactly depending on what it is, but I'm sure I can give some ideas on where to start. Cool. So that's your homework. Find some stuff that you like, and if you animate something, let's talk about it. Cool. And it could be something that you've animated in the past. It doesn't have to be something new necessarily. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome, guys. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and I'll see you next week.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
You got it. Bye.